Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Cult of Luna record, The Long Road North. So Cult of Luna, for those who don't know, are a post-metal sludge metal atmospheric post-sludge, whatever you want to call them. They're a really heavy metal band that play incredibly long, winding songs that are usually incredibly mid-paced. They have layers and layers of thick, atmospheric, distorted guitars and synths, and usually some extra percussion here and there, and some extra sounds as well, very occasionally. And that's pretty much what they do and what they've done for a really long time at this point. I've never been huge on Cult of Luna, but I've never really disliked them either. I've always respected them to an extent, I guess. And overall, I've heard maybe I don't know, a third of their discography. They've got a pretty long one, and I'm usually, when it's on, I'm like, this is pretty cool, decent, very oppressive, atmospheric, very downtrodden, gloomy kind of rock music, essentially, very heavy rock music, right? And as a result of all of that, I think the last record is probably the one I enjoyed the most, which is why I was more interested in this one. Also, I honestly just haven't seen that many releases recently that I'm super interested in, so got to fill the space to something. But no, Cult of Luna are a decent band. I understand why people love them so much. And I was kind of semi-eager to give this one a listen because one of my mates told me it was pretty good. And yeah, I can pretty much confirm at the very start of this whole rant that, yeah, this record is pretty good. It's nothing... it's not going to change your perceptions of what Cult of Luna are. It's not going to, convince any non-fans, I don't think. However, it is a decent, lengthy, atmospheric sludge, post-metal type record, I guess. You essentially have the same sort of tricks that you would hear on other Cult of Luna records. You've got the majority of the album made up of these just lengthy, kind of somewhat repetitive, very atmospheric, very hypnotic, oppressive, really heavy metal songs. You've on this record got 3 really big cuts and then 6. I wouldn't say some of them are kind of interlude-y and others are still lengthy cuts, but just not as lengthy as the absolute monster songs, I suppose. So I guess I should just start at the start of the song Cold Burn. I actually really liked the intro, and I really, really thought it was a promising start for a Cult of Luna record. I almost wish there was a little bit more experimentation in the vein of this. I felt like the opening to Cold Burn, which is the first track, is really industrial sounding. You've got these huge, heavy drones in the background. I'm pretty sure they're just done by synths. It's hard to say for sure, but... it's just this huge droning sound in the background while you have extra little bits of, all sorts of different instrumentation kind of folding into the mix very occasionally, but the whole thing is held together by this kind of it almost sounds like that noise from the film Inception that was in every trailer around that time. It sounds a little bit like that, and the whole thing just makes me feel like I'm being swallowed by this huge industrial machine. It feels very oppressive, very grey. And it really worked for me. I really, really enjoyed it. But then sort of halfway through the song, it breaks into this heavy, chugged, groovy section. It's very, standard for Cult of Luna. And this slowly builds into a kind of more post-rocky sort of section, which I didn't find to be as distinct as what was happening in the first half of the track. But, it was fine. It was a decent section. It just kind of, set up the fact that Cult of Luna are back with another record, and it's more or less what you're going to expect, I suppose. The Silver Arc, the second song, opens very atmospheric, sludgy. It's got a very thick guitar riff to hold the kind of chord together as the skeleton, I guess. Then you've got these kind of soured but bright guitar leads over the top. Again, very traditional in atmospheric sludge, I suppose. And the whole thing eventually quietens to a more post-metal passage that slowly builds. And overall, this song was actually, I thought, very good. Honestly, it's I think one of the better songs on the whole record. It was definitely a highlight because it has a really good progression, focuses on the atmospheric elements as well, and I just think that's where Cult of Luna can really shine when they want to. And it, after that, it eventually gives way to a very thick passage, which, sure, it's used a lot across this record, but I feel like all the other context of the song leading to this moment gives it just an extra bit of oomph, which I can always really appreciate. But I mean, for the record, this isn't like what I'm saying in reference to it being somewhat monotonous or pulling from the same bag of tricks. That's not necessarily a negative. For me, it means that over the course of a Cult of Luna record, I almost always end up like zoning out a little bit. But for a lot of people, it's a huge benefit because it just means you're in the atmosphere like 100% all the time. So if you haven't heard of Cult of Luna or you've somehow found it over here, and you don't know who this band are, do definitely give them a shot if you're into very like atmospheric music, because, like I said, a lot of the monotonous nature of the sound is kind of like going to be a positive if you're massive on this kind of stuff. But yeah, after the first two cuts, which were kind of a decent opening for a Cult of Luna record, you get like a short interlude called Beyond One. It's got very sparse instrumentals, with what almost sounds like, I think, wind chimes. I'm not 100% sure. Playing, I'd hesitate to even saying playing a melody. You just kind of hear them in the mix. They add a lot, though. I really like them. But the majority of the interlude is led by clean vocals, which are well performed, solid, like just decent, no issue with it. It's a good little interlude, breaks up the Silver Arc, which is a decent. Well, the first two tracks are both decently long, and it breaks them up between like essentially the longest song on the record, which is an offering to the wind. This opens with a very dramatic lead riff over what sounds like really quiet, fairly deep piano in the background. There's also an addition here that I really appreciate. Again, I think it's horns, but either way, you get some kind of like brass or like wind instrument, and it's only in there for a brief moment, but overall it just helps really elevate what Cult of Luna do. I think what I would appreciate is if Cult of Luna could like have more of these spots where they have extra instrumentation in to just like elevate certain parts. I feel like it could really add a ton. Because overall, this song is, again, a lot of what you would expect from Cult of Luna. In fact, towards the end, it reminded me a little bit of Neurosis, because it has this kind of like almost like tribal percussion pattern on the drums, and that's very like, Through the Blood in Silver-esque Neurosis, or at least it is to me. But overall, this track has a really, really powerful sense of dread, to quote some Peep Show. It was a particularly dreading, I guess, track. But the progression, again, was pretty solid. There was enough variation with instruments and whatnot to keep me hooked a decent chunk of the way through. And the other thing as well is at the end of this song, it has a really cool final riff that actually hits in a very visceral way, which is something that a lot of these records can kind of struggle with sometime. But yeah, after that kind of intro, I will admit this is where, the post metal, the atmospheric sludge fatigue set in a little bit, and I was definitely slightly less in tune with what was going on in the rest of the record. But it was mostly, same bag of tricks as what you'd expect for Cult of Luna. Lots of just those, really thick guitar riffs, very atmospheric. Kind of extra additions, but maybe less bells and whistles as there were on the first half of the record, which I thought was kind of unfortunate. Just to point to a couple highlights, though, I would say that Full Moon is a short interlude that essentially feels like, imagine like a really ultra slow motion spaghetti western soundtrack or something. That's kind of how it hit to me. I don't know why. There was just like this wailing instrument that kind of sat over the top of the mix. And that gave me like a spaghetti western vibe. I don't know why, but there is something almost like quite triumphant about this little interlude, and the way it moves into the self-titled song, The Long Road North, actually worked really well, because that song also has a slight spaghetti western vibe, at least to me. There's a ton of heavy, like percussion on the intro and low-key like droning synths that, again tie it back to that kind of Neurosis style of post metal, which I can appreciate. It was pretty cool. But then it eventually just breaks away into very classic sounding Cult of Luna. I really like the riff around 6:30. I'll say that it feels extra heavy, and it's just a really cool chord progression in general. That's the style of chord progression I actually really tend to like in this genre. But yeah, that was really the only other thing I'd point to. I guess like Blood Upon Stone was another very lengthy track. It's like an 11-minute song. It's the final big one. I mean, the final track, Beyond 2, is just a kind of drony outro. I didn't really have any notes for it. It was just kind of a the calm after the storm type thing, 4 minute little almost like watch the credits roll type deal. But Blood Upon Stone I didn't feel like was a particularly great song. On at least on first listen, I feel like I might get crucified for this somewhat because I don't know, these lengthy songs are where I think Cult of Luna maybe do better than other post-metal bands in the songwriting department, but it just does not hit that way for me at all. But it was just another lengthy tune. Some of the drum parts were really cool. There was some really intricate kind of like snare ride pattern that I really appreciated around halfway through the track, I think, in a sort of more low-key section. And as what you would expect, there's a ton of atmosphere in the middle portion. And ultimately, I'm not going to say this track was bad. It was just very enjoyable and kind of fine. And like I said, after a certain point in this record, I did zone out a bit because so much of this record sits in that mid-pace, like very, just maximalist in terms of like the, like if you listen to it with headphones on, you won't hear anything else around you. It's going to absorb all of your listening span for the entire duration of the record, more or less. So yeah, thick, heavy, atmospheric sludge metal, post-metal album. If that sounds good to you, you'll probably really enjoy this one. I think for me personally, I just wish it was a tiny bit more, just a couple more bells and whistles, and that's really all I can say about it on a first listen. I feel like I preferred this less than A Dawn of Fear, but interestingly, I would say the previous record, A Dawn of Fear, has less bells and whistles than this. It does less to vary it up. It feels more kind of just straight, like, it's genre tropes. But I don't know, there I felt like a lot of the progressions were more interesting. I also felt like that record was somewhat more dynamic. Like, the quiet bits on this album aren't really all that quiet. And there's still a lot going on in the mix. There's still a lot of just thickening up everything. So I didn't find this to be as good as A Dawn of Fear, but just a first listen, I guess. I still enjoyed it. It was like a decent record. I can't really say anything else beyond that point, though, to be honest. But yeah, this has been a very long, rambly, probably slightly repetitive listen, so you've gotten maybe slightly the experience of this Cult of Luna record, I guess. But hey, either way, just for listening, I hope you've enjoyed it. Even if you are a Cult of Luna fan, please forgive me. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast regardless, and I'll see you all around, alright? Peace out.